Well, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're talking about autism with a person who's wearing sunglasses and noise-canceling headphones in the middle of the workday on Zoom. Click here. You won't believe this autism.
As you should, as you should. So, David,
Well,
would you mind introducing yourself again?
I would love to. My name is David Ulrich. I use he, him pronouns. I am based in Kenosha, Wisconsin, which is an hour drive north of Chicago. And I am a queer adult with autism and ADHD. And I'm here to talk about it, baby.
We're glad. We love to see it. So, the first question we had prepared for you today is how would you describe autism in your own words?
Um, Autism is I can describe my autism in my own words because it's so different for everyone.
Yeah.
Um, as a collective whole, autism is like, let's see, what are some of the fun ways that I've heard described? It's like turning the volume on everything up to 11. One person described autism as living life without skin. Like the basic barrier between you and the overwhelming outside world is lacking in some way, whether that is in relation to sensory issues like sounds and lights and textures and tastes and feels. It could be related to social deficits. It can be all sorts of things. There can be things that are sensory related that are internal, like not being able to identify if you are very hungry or very thirsty, not being able to identify if you're tired. Um, there are so many different ways that this can present. For me, I would say it's like a life on hard mode. But just like playing any game on hard mode, you get really good at it when you play hard. It's like you either get good or you just get stuck. And um, I don't want to speak on behalf of all autistics by saying that because I can have an internalized ableism to it, but there are things where by get good, I mean things like I'm really good at knowing how to put socks on in a way that is not going to cause me to have a breakdown. Like there are things that I consider to be skills that I'm like, hey, do you want to talk for 45 minutes about bed sheets and how like the exact right bed sheets are required for you to even close your eyes at night? Um, that's my hard mode. And to a lot of people, that's like, I don't know, I'll just Google like which bed sheets are good. And I'm out here doing like a 5 hour search before I buy bed sheets because I gotta know exactly which ones I will be okay with.
I'm glad to get like that personal account of like how autism affects you. Because like of course you can ask like what is autism and you can list like a standard like definition that's on like WebMD. But like I like how you're like introspective with it and like we're able to get so personal. So thank you for that.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's really interesting because the perspective we got from an occupational therapist obviously was more biological. You already started touching on this, so I wanted to ask further, what challenges has autism brought to your life?
So I will answer that by explaining how I came to realize I was autistic, which is, um, Rain, this is going to be funny to you because you might be like, what? Um, I found myself at a point in life where I had made enemies throughout all of my life. And I looked back and I was like, why do all of these people hate me? And they were particularly in the workplace. I was having so much issue in work, job after job after job, of having really heightened conflict with people. And all throughout that process, I found myself in just feeling a lot of confusion. It was this overall feeling of like, I don't get why this keeps happening. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Um, and that began to expose to me some social deficits that I have regarding a lot of like standard normal cultural things in neurotypical America. For example, I am a person who, if you ask me my opinion on something, I will tell it to you. And I'm very bad at reading when people don't actually want that. Because sometimes people are like, you know, for instance, if there's a power dynamic and maybe your boss is asking you to give opinion on your boss's work, some people will instinctively be able to navigate the social relationship between the boss and the employee and find out like, how do I speak into this without insulting my boss? And I often would be like, I think there's a lot wrong with it. Here's what I don't really like about it. Here's what I think could change about it. And then suddenly I have this person who's angry at me and I'm like, I don't understand. You asked me what I thought, and I told you. Why are you upset now? Um, And that was a like pattern through a few jobs. It was realizing like when I approach things in my most natural way, it provokes conflict, and the conflict doesn't make sense to me. And I don't understand like why, like where I went wrong. I would talk to friends for hours and be like, how do I fix this? Like something's going wrong. Um, all of that to say, it was actually my workplaces that began to expose this for me. There is a huge unemployment rate among autistics. I think it's about 80% of autistics, of adults with autism are unemployed, because it can be so hard to navigate the workplace, not just for social things, but for a million different sensory things. And I had sensory presentations all along through that also contributed to my social deficits, because I would do things like, for instance, I worked in an office with about 7 people who all had their own offices, and I was the only one who worked with my door closed. And I got flack for it. People were like, "Why is like, oh, you don't want to talk to anybody? Like, you don't want to like, oh, you're like so private?" And I'm kind of like, yeah, like I'm working. Like I have to, and it's interesting because looking back, I could tell that what was really happening was that I was breaking an invisible social rule and being perceived by people as unaccommodating and inhospitable. And in my mind, what was happening was, if I have my door open, I have to look at the hallway lights, which are super bright overhead lights. And I have to hear people walking in through the front of the office and talking. And like, I will then be inviting people to come engage me in small talk. There's a list of like 15 things. It's like, all of these things together make it really difficult for me to do this. And then my office would be like literally darkness with a desk lamp and like a few other really cozy lamps, never overhead lights. Um, Autism allyship 101. If you turn on an overhead light, you hate autistic people. Like you need to turn off the overhead lights. We need to be getting lamps. We need table lamps. We need task lighting. I'm I'm like 80% kidding, but it is like a thing. Autistic people and overhead lighting do not get along. Um anyway, so I when the pandemic started and I started working from home, it was like this crazy revelation. Like, I've struggled with chronic migraines throughout my adult life, where there'd be months that I had more days with migraines than without migraines. And when the pandemic started and we all went home, the first few months, like everybody was just panicked and anxious all the time, and it was miserable. But then I found myself like working from home and loving it, and being like, um, I'm getting fewer migraines, and I'm like eating more meals. I have a really difficult time knowing when I'm hungry, so I will just not eat for like an entire day and be like, oh my God, it's 10 o'clock at night and my body hurts all over. I haven't eaten any food today. Um, so the pandemic hit and I started being like, I became in total control of my sensory needs for the first time in my adult life. And it changed everything. But then, like, when people started going back into offices, my workplace went back in person. And I was like, I hate this. I have got to change. And that all led me to realizing I was autistic. It was like looking at the social deficits, looking at the sensory needs, um, observing how much better I felt when I was in control of my environment. Um, so that's some of it.
I hate that like your work environments are so hostile and like very neurotypical. They didn't even like try to accommodate you. They just assume that you were all sorts of negative traits when you were just like attending to your sensory needs. Like I'm genuinely sorry for that.
Thanks. And I think that if I had language to explain it better, I probably could have like had a better experience. I was so high masking that I would try so hard to present this charismatic figure of like, oh well, I mean, and I kind of leaned into my queerness too, of like, oh, like this lighting's just so tacky. Like I like a good office light, and try to make it a joke, but like they knew I wasn't joking. And I wish I had the language to be like, I'm experiencing a level of sensory overload, and it really helps me if I can do this. It has nothing to do with you. It has to do with my nervous system being dysregulated by things that don't dysregulate your nervous system. I wish I could have done that, but frankly, helping, like, there's two types of ableists. There's ableists who are just ignorant. And if I had said that to them, they would have been like, oh my God, thank you for educating me. And then there's ableism where it's like, I don't care. That's still weird, and you can't be weird. And I don't know. like which category some of those past colleagues would have fallen into, where like that might not have worked. I might have just still looked like the weird person. And when you look like the weird person and then you start telling people directly what you think when they ask you, it can really quickly lead to people being like, you're just mean or something. You're just like an asshole. And I'm like, I don't feel like an asshole. I feel like I'm just doing my job and I don't know what to tell you.
Well, you're obviously not the problem. And I'm glad that like even though like the pandemic was like pretty rough, I'm glad you're able to like control like your sensory needs and like figure out what works for you. And just like going off of that, since you were able to like identify like the issues in your past as like symptoms of autism, like how did you go from like realizing that to like getting diagnosed and like getting treatment? And how did that like diagnosis or realization like change your perspective?
Yeah. So I got professionally diagnosed as having ADHD first. It was literally, I was another person on TikTok who was like, TikTok diagnosed me. Then I went to my doctor and I was like, hey, I watched a bunch of TikToks about ADHD and I think I have ADHD. Thankfully, my doctor was surprisingly not rude about that. Because a lot of people will immediately dismiss that as like, oh my God, you learned this on TikTok. You're fine. Um, but my doctor gave me an ADHD assessment and it was hilarious. Like I looked through the questions on it and I just was laughing because I was like, this is so true to me. One of the questions was, do you feel like there is an internal engine inside of your body driving you to just move and like you can't turn that off? And I was like, yeah. And there's a question that was like, do you find yourself getting up, like standing up all the time in situations where you should be seated? And I'm like, yes, I literally like every meeting I've ever been in, I am like leaving the room 3 times to be like, oh, I left something on my desk. Oh, I have to go in the other room. Like I have to go grab something. Rain, now that I've said that, I promise you, you will notice this in me that like I am constantly getting up. I'm like, oh, real quick, let me go walk over here. Um,
My water
so
bottle.
yeah, exactly. So I got diagnosed with ADHD and started taking Adderall for that. And it changed my life entirely overnight. It was so crazy for the first time being like, wow, I don't have the Encanto soundtrack blasting full volume in my head without my desire while I'm trying to get things done, and a nagging voice in my head being like, I don't want to do any of this. Let's just sit on the couch. And then, like, even sitting on the couch, I can't walk to the couch because I'm so paralyzed with executive dysfunction. Suddenly, I was like, I have to write emails. I will write them. Email sent. Now I will move on and do new things. And it was like, oh my God. I didn't really mention that in my previous workplace struggles, but the executive dysfunction that comes with ADHD and can come with autism as well. Executive dysfunction means like you know completely what it is you're supposed to do. You just cannot get your body to do it. It feels like it will cause you physical pain to do that thing. People like to talk about having spoons, like you start your day off with 10 spoons, and some of the tasks require a spoon. Like if I send this email, that's going to cost me a spoon. And if I go walk my dog, that's going to cost me 3 spoons. And if I make dinner for myself, that's going to cost 5 spoons. And the moment I run out of spoons, I am unable to do anything for the rest of the day. I'm just going to have to sit and look at my phone and doom scroll. So I found myself having much more spoons, which was great. And then I felt like it was a miracle, like, oh my God, this diagnosis changed my whole life. And then a few months later, we returned to in-person work and everything got really hard again. And I was like, what is going on? Why is this so difficult? I thought everything was fine. I should mention, by the way, that for years I had been misdiagnosed with other things. I was misdiagnosed as having depression, then anxiety, took medication for both of those, and it never helped. Because I think fundamentally it was like, I'm not depressed and I wasn't having anxiety or ruminating thoughts. I was unable to function because my neurodivergence. I just couldn't do things. And then that would cause anxiety because I'd be like, oh my God, I can't send my emails and I have so many emails to send and I know this is going to get me in trouble. So I would present as being anxious, but the anxiety was secondary. The primary thing was executive dysfunction. Um, anyway, so when I got back to the office, interestingly, these headphones were a big part of how I began thinking that I was autistic because I like helped a friend with some house project and she was like, if you do this huge project, it was like helping her move in and set up her house and paint her walls. It was a lot of work. She was like, if you do that, I'll buy you a pair of noise canceling headphones. And I was like, great. I got them. I put them on and I was like, whoa, like life has changed again. And I was like heavily on autism TikTok as well. And I always watched stuff being like, that's so interesting. Look at those other people and the stuff they struggle with. And then I started trying to apply some of it to myself and be like, let me see if this helps me. And it did. And so it was like, after getting diagnosed with ADHD and taking medication and having so much of that resolved, it's almost like, I don't have any data for this, but in my experience, this feels very true. And I've heard other people say this. When you have ADHD and autism, the ADHD can unknowingly be addressing a lot of your autistic needs. So like me getting up and moving around sometimes would be me addressing a sensory issue. Like I'm a person that when I go to restaurants, I will use the bathroom 3 times and I'm not even like using the bathroom. I'm just standing there. I just like go into the bathroom and like take this big breath. And I looking back, I'm like, that was just you being overstimulated and instinctively taking care of yourself. And your little ADHD engine was kind of like, I need to move my legs and go do something. And so you did. But now that my ADHD engine was like slowed down and I was a bit more in control, it was like, oh my God, the light in this room is so bright and like it is absolutely killing me. Or like this office space, I can hear them doing construction across the street and I literally can't think. Or I can hear my boss in that room behind me on the phone and all I can hear is that phone call and I'm so stressed because I need to get stuff done and I can't focus. So I actually never have been formally diagnosed with autism. I felt really conflicted about that, especially about self-identifying as autistic without a formal diagnosis. But there's a big message in the autism community of validating self-diagnosis because the best explanation I've heard for it was if every time you eat peaches, you have an allergic reaction and your throat swells up and you break out in hives, you don't need to go to an allergist to tell you you have an allergy to peaches. The only time you need to go to an allergist probably is because somebody in your life doesn't believe you. So like maybe you work in food service and you tell your boss, hey, I don't want to handle the peaches. I have breakouts when I touch peaches. And your boss is like, can you prove that? You're like, well, I could touch a peach and break out, but I don't want to do that. So then you go to the allergist just to present like the doctor's note to prove to people that you know your body the way that you know that you do. And that was a kind of game changer for me because I was like, I know that this is true about myself. I can see all these patterns. It can cost upwards of $1,000 to pursue a diagnosis. There's often a very long waiting list. I looked into it and it was like a 16-month list at a place that my insurance was accepted. So I just was like, I'm just going to start using this label for myself because I don't need, no one is demanding that I provide this formal diagnosis right now. So I'm not going to pursue it. I still might, if I can find a way to do that, that isn't going to be like financially too demanding. But in the meantime, like I know what works for me and I know that there's so much internalized ableism to being like, how could I possibly ask for something that I need if a doctor hasn't told me that I'm allowed to? And I just feel like that's so sad. Like people know what they need. We should be allowed to be the experts on our own experience. And if I know that wearing sunglasses in the middle of the day in a dark room is going to help me, who cares if a doctor tells me that? Like, I don't need that. So
I'm
yeah,
glad.
So,
Ayo, you can go.
sorry. I was gonna say that's so interesting. Thank you for explaining that with like so much detail that like two neurotypical people can understand. And I hate that there are so many.
you muted yourself.
Crazy. I know how to work my phone. I promise.
It's okay. We'll insert a commercial break on YouTube right there. It'll be like, call BetterHelp to get help from blah, 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 betterhelp.com. Back to you, Sajni.
I love that you described that in so much detail that like two neurotypical people can understand. And I hate that there are so many injustices in the autism community when all you guys want to do is like live your guys' best life. Um, our next question for you is looking back on your childhood. I know you mentioned that you didn't like get understand your diagnosis until your adult years. But do you, looking back on your childhood, do you think that autism affected your childhood? And if so, how? Like in the school system,
Yeah,
particularly.
that's such a great question. Um, I have trouble remembering a lot of my childhood, but what I do remember, I was bullied so much as a kid, and I really do think that my bullying was like probably 70% related to me being autistic and 30% related to me being queer. Because those things were both just presenting themselves to other people in ways that I couldn't control. I remember one time a kid that I was like thought I was best friends with. And I went everywhere with him. And like in my perspective, like we were best friends doing everything. And I was really like physically would be like standing very close to him when we'd walk. And one day he just like erupted at me and shouted at me on the playground, like, can you give me some like I don't know if he cussed. We were at like a little private school. I don't know if you get away with that, but it was like, can you please give me some space? Like, geez, you're always like right on top of me. Can you please give me space? And he stormed away. And then later his parents called my parents to say that they wanted me to like not interact with him anymore. And I was so caught off guard. I was like, I thought we were friends. I thought we were best friends. Um, and I had no idea that what I was doing was socially abnormal behavior. Um, I was basically the way I describe my education experience is that I was an unmasked autistic in elementary school. There was another day, this is just like such a funny story to me looking back, where we were doing show and tell in the classroom. And it was like fourth grade, and this girl had brought this like mechanical pencil thing that like had all these different faces on it. And when you clicked it, there was like a message inside that would rotate and it would say like a different positive message. And I thought it was so cool. And we were passing it around to all the like chairs. And I was clicking through it just like so fascinated. And then I took it apart and I took out all the pieces from the inside and started looking at it and seeing how it worked. And then the inner motor kicked on, and I was like, I have to go to the bathroom. I have to stand up and walk away. So I asked the teacher if I can go to the bathroom, and I left, and I came back, and this girl was sobbing, and the entire class turned around and said, "What did you do?" And I, as this little fourth grade kid who was just like enjoying this curious moment, was like, uh, what? And they were like, you broke her pen. This pen is like really special to her. And I walked over and I fixed it in like 3 seconds. And it was like, everybody calm down. Like, I got this. I wish that my adult self could parent my inner child in that moment and be like, hey, these kids are dumb because this is really easy to put back together. Don't they understand that the world just works mechanically? So I just like quickly was like, this gear goes here, this goes here, blah, 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 blah. Here, your pen is fine. But at this point, I'm sobbing because I was just confused. I'd say like the dominant emotion, the way that autism has affected my life is confusion. There have been so many social settings and so many moments that I'm like, I did something wrong and I don't know what it was. And everyone else seems to know. And I don't know how everybody got the rule book that you're not allowed to do the thing I just did, but they somehow all did. And um, by the time I got into high school, I finally like got kind of good at masking. I was in activities that people thought were cool. I was a musician who performed on stage, not like a school band musician, but like a cool like playing at a club musician. And I was a drummer. And I started dressing in really like indie cool, like edgy ways and finding this subculture to fit into in which I could like perform this social behavior that people thought was really cool and really different. Um, and people began to like me. It's almost like I discarded so much of who I was as a person. I discarded a lot of my normal interests. I was super into video games and I like went a good 10 years without playing them because I just kind of felt one day like playing video games makes people not like you. So I can't do that. I have to do cool, extroverted, performance based things that will make people think I'm impressive. And it worked for a long time. I had like a decade where people just thought I was the coolest shit. And I was like, had such an easy time making people impressed by me. However, I don't think I was very good at making friends. I had people who were like in awe of me, but I felt very isolated. I felt like all of my friends were closer with each other than they were with me. And I was the weirdo on the outside. And I don't think I knew why I felt like that, but I think it was autism looking back. Um, and then um, in my later education in college, I finally reached a really common phase in a lot of autistic people's lives is that I reached my first really big episode of autistic burnout. Um, I went so hard on college. I was a double major, and one of the majors I did was a linguistics degree where the minimum requirement was that you had to do 3 years of one language or 2 years of one language. And I did 3 years of two languages in addition to my other degree, just because I found the languages really interesting. And I was like, the amount of homework I was doing was so insane. And I also was working a part-time job, like two part-time jobs, and applying for grad school. And it was so breakneck and exhausting. And then I started grad school, and that's when the burnout hit. My first semester of grad school, I went from being like a straight A college student to like put on academic probation in my first semester of grad school because I could not do it. I was like falling asleep all the time. I would take the train to school and like on the train, just dead asleep every time because I was so exhausted. My body could not do it. And it took me almost 3 years to recover. I like crawled my way through grad school, and then I got my first real job and I got fired from it within a year. Which was kind of like a rock bottom moment of like I got fired because I couldn't do things like send emails. I would literally have a work day where my only task was to send an email, and I'd be so paralyzed by it that I just couldn't do it. Um, so that at the tail end of my education, like if it was a 3 chapter book, chapter one is like this bullied kid who doesn't know how to respect personal space. Chapter two was like the cool rock star who got everyone to like him. And chapter three was the formerly gifted burnout who just was like, just passed out, completely unable to do simple things in life. That's when really like my diet fell apart. I stopped eating very well. I kind of just stopped eating. Not in any kind of like eating disorder way. It had nothing to do with how I perceived myself. Eating felt like work. It was so hard. I had one meal that I liked, and it was this burger and fries combo that my grad school had. And that was truly all I ate for like 2 years. Like I would go to school and get that. And I tried so hard to keep it a secret. I didn't want anybody to know because I was so embarrassed that like this is all I'm able to eat. Um, and then actually, it's funny. I just remembered that. And looking back, I'm like, that was such a huge autism thing. I was so overstimulated by food, and this was like the only food that was safe for 2 years. It's crazy. I mean, I think I like snacked on stuff, but like mostly it was that cafeteria burger and fries, which in fairness was extremely good. They did these like handmade fries where they would like press them in that potato presser thing right in front of you, and then they were just so tasty. So like if you have to pick a safe food, I did a good pick. And I did get sweet potato fries, which I rationalized to myself was like make it slightly healthier, but it was still like the same thing all the time.
Brain hates sweet potatoes and I love them. So I approve of your taste.
You had me at the fries.
They were great. It was in the meal cost like $4. So it was like, I can afford this and I'm gonna do it and I'm not gonna let anybody know. People would be like, do you want to have lunch together? And I'd be like, yeah, but if we have lunch, I need to like hide from you in the cafeteria for the next few weeks so that you don't see that I'm eating the same thing.
It's like it's interesting to see how like the autism presented like in three so incredibly like different ways in like every like phase of your life. And how were you able to get out of like the autistic burnout like phase?
Um, Time. I was unemployed for like 6 months, and I think that in that space, I still had no idea I didn't know what was going on. I thought I was just depressed. That's when I got diagnosed with depression, actually, because I just wanted to do nothing. And in retrospect, I probably would have got out faster if I let myself do nothing. There's so much internalized ableism about doing nothing where people are like, if I truly get up and like wear the same thing as yesterday and don't do much, people feel like they are such failures as humans. Um, so I was like weirdly training for a triathlon during that season, which is so funny looking back. I'm like, girl, what were you trying to prove? Like you being this big athlete for what? But I think I just needed to feel like I wasn't crazy. And I wasn't crazy. I was just autistic and I was really tired and overstimulated. And like I started doing things instinctively that looking back, I'm like, that's so sweet. You were taking care of your autism and you didn't know it. Like I was really big on blackout curtains in all of my living situations. I moved like 8 times through my 20s, and every time I'd be like, oh, there's new windows. We have to go buy curtains. And I'd always buy blackout curtains. And everyone would be like, why do you buy blackout curtains? And I'm like, because you don't want light coming through. How do you function with light? Ew. Um, so I
Nasty.
don't know. Yeah, it was kind of just time. And eventually I got a job that was the next job that I got was pretty low key. Um, like I probably was required to do about 4 hours of work a week. This is a very ADHD thing to say. I had tasks that could take up every workday the whole day. I was able to do them in about 4 hours and then like go to meetings that were required. And then otherwise, like be very, very slow. Like my days were just like not overtaxing. I sat in a very dark office that people judged me because I kept it so dark. But I would go slow, and I think like that year and a half of that job probably was really helpful in like me feeling like a human being again. Cause I mean, and it's crazy because I went from doing stuff every second of the day. When I was in college, I had a calendar on like I kept my like iCal up to date, and I would write what homework I was doing on my calendar, and every day had stuff on every single minute. It was crazy. Like I have no clue how I performed that high. And then I got to a point a few years later where I was like, I can't even send an email. Like I can't answer the phone. I had this work event where I was supposed to go and film this like conference that was happening. And I had some car trouble that day. And then like I just couldn't do it. And so I just didn't go. My boss was like, you didn't go? Like, why didn't you call a taxi? Why didn't you do something? And looking back, I'm like, because I was so overstimulated that I just broke. I couldn't do it. And I didn't know how to ask for help and I didn't know what I needed. So I just like went inside and turned all the lights off and like sat there feeling guilty about myself.
I hate that you felt guilt, but like I'm glad that at least like even in that situation you're able to like tend to your own needs, whether like your boss understood or not. It's like I hate
Yeah,
being so burnt. Like I feel so much empathy for you. I'm so sorry.
thanks. There's ways that I'm proud of my younger self because I'm like, you were taking care of your needs.
Yeah.
But the internalized ableism was so strong that the idea of articulating that was like a nightmare. I was so deep in hustle culture. Everyone around me was like high achieving, like insanity levels. And you would never want to reveal to people that you couldn't do something. So I just presented to people as if I was this kick-ass person. And internally, I was like, I feel so. It was kind of like me hiding in the cafeteria, not wanting anyone to see my food. Like that's how I reacted in all of life. Was like, I can't let anybody see, because I know that I'm at like 5% internal battery, but I have to pretend that I'm at 100, and that lasted a long time.
Based on like your experiences, how do you think that neurotypical people can be more inclusive and like more accommodating to people with autism?
Um, I think about this question a lot. It's still in my own journey, something that I'm trying to push through my own like lifelong internalized ableism, because when you're a high masking autistic who doesn't realize you're autistic, you get really good at doing things without asking anyone to help you, because I think you instinctively know that they won't get it, and you don't even really get it. You just know that you need it. So it's still hard for me to ask other people to like accommodate what I need. I suppose the main thing that I have thought so far is like my ideal, let's say, workplace, or like my ideal classroom would be one where the people who I'm with understand that I'm going to do things that look and present as socially different than them, and that they will have every urge within themselves to be like, that's wrong, you can't do that. Like imagine a kid wearing noise canceling headphones and sunglasses in a classroom. What teacher would be cool with that? Like a really educated teacher would be. And the sad thing is the amount of education it takes is just like a couple hours. Like, let's just talk about it and let me help you understand this. And if somebody really had high empathy, like I think they would get it and they would make accommodations. Um, as a kid, like there was a million things that I struggled with that I wish that I had accommodations for. Um, but in terms of like what I wish neurotypicals would know or what they could do, um, one is I do think that neurotypicals need to realize that they are the ones driving the demand for people to get diagnosed in order to be taken seriously. Um, Autistic people don't diagnosis to take care of autism. Neurotypicals often demand a diagnosis so that they can accommodate your disability. Um, People don't mind you having a disability until it affects them as well. It's like having a wheelchair, and people are like, yeah, I support wheelchair users. But the moment you ask a small business owner, like, hey, you need to build a wheelchair accessible entry to your store, you have 2 steps at the entry to your store. This is not accessible. Suddenly, then they are taxed by accessibility for this wheelchair user. And they're like, oh my God, like the government's trying to control me or something. And in my experience, it's like, oh yeah, like I get it that you have sensory needs, but when this donor comes by to talk to you, you can't be wearing sunglasses, you can't be wearing headphones, and you need to like wear an uncomfortable, stiff outfit that you feel like is ripping your skin off. Like you need to do all these things because, you know, neurotypicals often like perform understanding and empathy toward you, but then at the end of the day, they're like, but I still need you to do it in the neurotypical way because that's the default, and I have no way of thinking outside of the default. Which is hard because in some ways, like given that example about showing up to a donor wearing headphones and sweatpants, like they probably wouldn't give you money if that's how you met with this donor, because our system is very ableist and they don't want to support anybody who looks too different. Um, but like, one thing I tell autistic people and parents of autistic kids all the time is in some ways, you can't wait for the world to change. You actually just have to find a situation that is safe for you. Like, so right now I work from home. That is like best case scenario for autistic people, work from home, because you won't have to worry about fighting all those battles at work. I've had colleagues that I have like battled previously, have had battles with over office lighting, where I would directly tell them like I have a really hard time when all the overhead lights are on. Can we dim it? There are these lamps. It works. But and they'd be like, yeah, of course. Like I want to take care of your needs. But then if they got to work before me, they would just turn the overhead lights on, and I'm like, what the heck? Now I feel like I have to confront you by turning them off. Um, Sometimes that is unavoidable. Like you can't change every workplace, you can't change every ally, you can't, you know, queer people learn this as well, that like there are people in your life who are just never going to accept you. And you can try and try and try and try to make them see it from your perspective. But some people just aren't ready until they're ready. And you have to accept that. So in some ways, it's like do your best to help the people around you understand. If they don't, go somewhere else, because like it's not worth wasting your time asking for neurotypicals. It's truly not. Like, there are other jobs where you will make it. There are other teachers in other classrooms and other colleges that will be better to you. So go to one that's better, because it is so not worth being hurt and like damaging yourself because other people are refusing to see you.
I understand that. The wheelchair metaphor really spoke to me because my mom's paralyzed, and so like I witness like ableism in my everyday life, and I know that people with like cognitive conditions or like the invisible conditions that can like pass without their illness being shown have such a difficult time being heard and seen as part of the disabled community and getting the accommodations that they need. Um,
Yeah.
uh, what are the common stigmas people have about autism that prevent neurotypical people specifically from like accepting them? Yeah.
Currently, I think the number one, top of the list, no question asked, is the narrative that like you think you're autistic because TikTok told you. There are thousands of kids who are identifying with autism and being told every day that because they learned it on TikTok that that's stupid. But like, uh, there's a graph that autistic people share all the time on the internet that shows that previously in schools they forced children to write with their right hand. Even if you were left-handed, they would just make you write with your right hand. And then as soon as they lessened that requirement and started letting people write with their left hand, there's a graph that showed that like suddenly so many more people were documented as being left-handed. And I'm sure that at that time, there were teachers who were like, you're all faking it to get attention. You're faking it to get special accommodations. You just want special treatment. That's why you're all pretending to be left-handed. When in reality, it's like, we probably always knew that writing with our right hand was weird. And I didn't get a formal left-handed diagnosis. I just know that I like holding the pen in that hand. And I'm not doing this for you to give me attention, which is such a crazy narrative too. Because like literally what good attention comes from that? Like the people, the amount of people, every time that I tell someone I'm autistic, it's a huge risk. It's like, this could end where I'm at in my career. This could like make this friendship become really difficult. I might get super like rudely reacted to. So like, who's going on TikTok to try to get all this popularity by pretending to be autistic when it's like, for what? Who's giving you good treatment? It's not like you go to school, then they roll out a red carpet for you being like, oh my God, let's dim the lights and make everything more easy for you. It's like, okay, well, if you can bring a doctor's note, maybe we'll talk about giving you extra time on tests. And that's kind of the only thing we can think of. So I think that narrative is like one of the biggest stigmas. People who know that they have a disability, you just need to trust them. Even if you think they're faking it, treat them like they're not, and they will eventually get to the realization that that's not true for them. It's the exact same thing with queerness. I think queerness and neurodivergence are really related. With both of them, you kind of come out of the closet. Like coming out as autistic, it's more like coming out as queer than it is just like requesting special access or something, because it's you never know how someone's going to react to you and if it's going to change your entire relationship with them. But like, I wish that people treated both queerness and neurodivergence as if the person telling the story is the expert on their own experience, and your job is to validate them and let them do what they need to do for themselves. I wish that teachers thought so outside the box about like, you don't need to design your classroom as a one size fits all. You can design a classroom with dim lighting that has task lights on desks. There's no reason that you can't. People just have an idea that like all classes in all schools need to be the same, and they are building everything for like one group of kids, and all the other ones are struggling. And I just wish people gave themselves permission to be like, that kid knows what's best for them. Let's try it their way and see if it helps.
No, I get what you're saying. I love your public speaking skills because like your metaphor with like telling left-handed kids like they can't like use their left hand. That literally happened to me when I was a kid. And they're like that's like the teacher literally said like that's weird. Like just use your right like everybody else. But
Are
like
you for real?
I'm
In the
s-
2000s?
I was like 4 years old. This chick put my hand down on the table until I learned to write with my right hand. And it's just like,
That's crazy. That graph was from like the 1920s. That is 100
no,
years late, that behavior of this teacher.
because I went to
Ironic
private
enough,
school. Like,
ironically, I also had the same experience, but instead of it being with the teacher, it was like with my dad. The first time I picked up a pencil, we still talk about this. It was with my left hand, and then after that, like he was like, "No, we write with our right hand." It's also a big part of like
Interesting.
religion, like you eat with your right hand and like all of that. So it also had like cultural ties. Um,
Interesting.
but yeah, I was told that right hand is the right way to do it. That's why it's called your right hand.
Oh my God, that's so fascinating. Y'all have literally been time traveling into like anti-left-handed bigotry.
no, but like people, that's the exact way that people treat like neurodivergency and like mental illness, or like that's not how it's supposed to be. So it just doesn't exist, and there's no accommodations made when people, there's no right way to have a brain. Like the, people naturally vary. Like I obviously don't look like you, like I don't look like Sajni. Our brains aren't always gonna look the same. It's like not ever, there's a spectrum, like there's diversity for a reason. And I don't see why there can't be accommodations. Like you're completely right with that.
Yeah, you know, it's fascinating because people will tell you your entire life that like to be creative and to be yourself and that you need to like not let anybody else tell you who to be. You have to find your own self. But then the moment you're like, so can I wear sunglasses inside? They're like, no, that's crazy. No one does that. Like, what happened to be creative? What happened to you do you, babe? Can I please get some of that energy?
Yeah, like the second an autistic person were to not mask, they'll be like, "Oh my God, what are you doing?" Be for real.
Yeah,
Anyway,
yeah.
I think we had one last question prepared, which is like despite like the conditions that like or not conditions, the experiences that you've described, like do you think that having autism has affected your life for like, for the better in any way?
I think that mine has. I actually just watched this great TikTok discourse about this. There is a word people use called ASP supremacy. ASP is short for Asperger's, which is a word people don't typically use, but in the autism community, historically, there's been the word Asperger's to describe someone who is um, like very different, but in like a cool way, like in a socially acceptable way. The reason this word's not used anymore is it was developed, from what I understand, and I could be incorrect on some of these details. From what I understand, it was developed by a Nazi doctor to determine which like mentally disabled people were worth killing and which ones weren't. So like
Oh,
very tied to eugenics, this concept. So people with Asperger's um usually use that word to differentiate themselves of like, I'm not like the other girls. I'm a cool autistic. Because I have genius superpowers, but sometimes the lights are too bright for me, and I'm not going to flap my hands around you because I know that that would be weird to you. Like it can be really tied to negativity. All of that said, in my experience, there are things that I have grown to truly love and cherish about my autism that make me me in a way that I feel like have always been some of my favorite parts of myself. Um, the same part of me that used to get in trouble in so many workplaces when people would ask me, you know, my opinion, and then I'd give it, and then they would secretly harbor resent about that. Um, I know that I'm a person who can say what I'm thinking and that I'm a pretty analytical person, and I like have always felt like even in I said the work example again, I've also been a person who's never really bothered with social hierarchies. Like when I was in college, I like randomly scheduled lunch with the president of my college, and I thought nothing of it. I was like, who cares that you're the president? You're just a person with a job. I'm truly not intimidated by you one bit. And looking at the time, I thought I was just like this badass who was like so edgy. And looking back, I'm like, you were autistic and you didn't care about the hierarchy because that truly didn't affect. Like one of the diagnostic questions they ask autistic people is maybe this isn't a diagnostic question, it's a question that I've heard people ask though, is like, do you find yourself communicating in the same ways regardless of the social situation you're in? So like, do you talk at a party similar to how you talk at work, similar to how you talk with your parents, similar to how you talk with kids? If you are like pretty much the same in all of those, where um like likely what's happening is that the various social difference like hierarchies in those settings are not affecting you. So you're just doing you, which can get you in trouble because sometimes you talk to uh, your boss the same way you talk to your friends. And I'm not talking about boundaries in the sense of like, I'm going to gush about my personal life to my boss. I'm more talking about just like social decorum and stuff. Like, do I defer to what my boss says as being right, even if I disagree? And I'm like, usually no. I'll tell them no. But um, that's something I love about myself. It's gotten me in trouble in truly like every situation I've ever been in, but I actually really like it because I'm like, the people who are safe with me and who love me deeply know that if they ask me anything, I'm going to tell them the truth to the best of my ability. It's not like I never have lied, but like I'm a terrible liar and I'm pretty good at telling you what I'm feeling, and not censoring myself like that through my life, I feel like has made me really in touch with me. Like I feel like I know what I think. And I don't know if that makes sense, but
No, I get it.
like I feel like I have a vibrant, like almost like I don't know. But I know
Energy?
that it's not that vibrant energy. It's like I feel like especially like now more and more as I have been on my own unmasking journey, like feeling like I'm really honoring my own self. Like if I'm feeling wrong about something, I know that I typically take action to deal with that and like address it in a way that sometimes gets me in trouble because you're sometimes not supposed to do that. But I love that I do that. Like I like that I'm a person who will just say if I don't like something and who won't cave from the social pressure that people put on to not do that. Not that I'm like, it's so interesting. I feel this nervousness from masking highly my whole life that like people often interpret that as saying I'm going to do things my way and I'm totally unwilling to work with others. And that's not what I mean at all. I know what it means to compromise and to like work as a team and understand that I will not always get my way, but I will always speak my piece. I'm a person who can be like, this is what I think. I know that we disagree. Let's do it your way because I want to work together, but I'm not going to pretend to you that I'm like wasn't thinking something else. And that's a pressure put on people a lot. Um, anyway, I also feel like, I don't know, there's probably more things, but there's a lot that I love about myself that is directly related to me being neurodivergent. Um, and I had previously felt so much shame about those exact things. And now I'm like, who cares? Those are the coolest parts about me. And when I have other autistic friends or ADHD friends or just friends with really big hearts, those are the things they love most about me too. Like there's one thing that I do that's always been a very autistic thing. People call it my loud laugh, which is that if I'm in a public setting, like in a movie theater or like at a play or hearing somebody speak, if I find something's funny, there's this unique laugh I will do that is like this explosive gong hit of just like really, really loud. And it usually provokes the audience to laugh as well because they're like, that was such a weird laugh. And like my close friends love that about me. They'll be like, are you gonna do your loud laugh tonight? And I'm like, you better believe it. Um, even though I know that like there's probably people in those moments who are like, what a freak. I'm like, I don't care. I'm loving this. I'm here for me. I'm here to have a good time. So I'm gonna laugh loud.
I aspire to that laugh one day.
Yeah. It usually happens when somebody's like putting themselves all the way out there without any shame and they like swing and miss. Like somebody who makes a dad joke on stage and nobody laughs, that's when I do the loud laugh. And it's not because the joke's funny, it's because I'm like, I so respect that this person's up here making dumb jokes and just like going with it.
But I'm glad you're able to go from like so like heavily masking in high school and just like carefully like curating some image to get people to like you. And now like you're learning how to like unpack everything and like unmask and love those things about you that like other people have found weird in the past. So like I'm proud of your journey.
Thanks. I wish it was like I'll be honest and say like that is a journey that's still fairly private. Like there's a lot of people in my life who have only ever known me as a high masking person. And if one of those people called me tomorrow and said, "Hey, let's get coffee," I'd probably be terrified because I'd be like, once you look in the mirror and see these things about yourself, it's really hard to go back to masking in the same way. It feels exhausting in a different way because now you're conscious of it. And so there are people that like I have not shown myself to because I'm like, I don't really feel safe doing that with you. But even that feels in some ways like self-care that I'm proud of. Is like there are people that I have not felt pressured to perform myself to, even though weirdly that in itself is breaking a big social rule, which is like you're not going to follow up with that person. And I'm like, no, because I need to do this for me, and that's okay. Um, so
I'm glad you're taking care of yourself. And just like thank you for opening up with us and like doing this interview and just like letting us into like the perspective of an autistic person. Because like honestly, this was really enlightening.
you're so welcome. It was such a pleasure. You asked great questions, and I feel like so thrilled that you're doing this project. And I hope that you can, um, I don't know. I hope it's interesting to you.
No, it really is.
Very like interesting and insightful. I do a lot of work with neurodivergent like, little kids, and my experience with adults hasn't been too great yet, although I will expand on that as I go through college. Um, so hearing your experience and your insights like that, some of those experiences that you were talking about, that is what I want to help better. Like I want to be an occupational therapist when I grow up. So like
Sweet. That's so cool.
thank you. I want to help like little kids not go through like the experiences you had in like fourth grade with that guy that you thought was your best friend. Or like little things like that, like navigating the world, that was very much not meant for them. And I know like that can be an impossible challenge.
Yeah. Can I give you an unsolicited piece of encouragement about that as relates to occupational therapy specifically?
Please do.
There's a specific type of therapy. I think it's called ABA. That is like a really hot button issue. Are you familiar with this?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a huge hot button issue in the autistic community because it's essentially like conversion therapy for autistic kids to pretend to be neurotypical. People have often called it dog training because it's like this really brutal way of being like, no, you have to make eye contact. Look at that person in the eye. Or like you have to like stop flapping your hands. If you flap your hands, you're gonna go in timeout. It's so sad and does so much damage. And like technically, it's basically just therapy to teach kids how to mask.
Yeah.
Um, and like I can understand where the parents who do that and the therapists who do that are coming from because what they're addressing is the world is very unsafe for autistic people. People are going to judge you and be mean to you all the time. It's the same way for queer people. But the effect of it is much like conversion therapy for queer people, where it's like going back into the closet might help you face less distress in the world, but at what cost? Like you're going to be fake to yourself your whole life, and that is going to hurt you way more than like some random ass bully in fourth grade. That kid who was mean, like who blew up at me, I don't care about him now. I literally am thriving out here. He could I like, he could be president tomorrow, and I'd be like, okay, I literally don't care. Like, so let the kids flap their hands in class and let them not make eye contact. Also, who cares about eye contact? God, the pressure. People just like settle down. And if someone needs to flap their hands in public, okay, like they're just feeling a lot and processing it in their body in a way that's really healthy for them. What are you doing? Are you even in therapy, Jason? Jesus. The kid's name wasn't Jason, but like if you need a punching bag of like an imaginary person, Jason's just a good name for it.
Yeah, I can see that. But like going off like what you said like earlier, just like if your environment's not accepting, go somewhere else. Like how you like found a different job that like accommodated to your needs and like found better people who didn't suck. And it's like I hope that like
Yeah,
the kids can do that like under Sajani's care as an occupational therapist.
totally. I think that so many people who are marginalized spend so much time trying to change the system from within. And sometimes When the people in that system are teachable and wanting to grow, and they want it, they are asking for that growth, they're going to do it. And they're probably going to make a bunch of mistakes and hurt you so much. But like, if you want to do that, great. There are so many other places though that don't care. And you can tell yourself over and over and over again that like, if I just explain it in the right way, maybe they'll get it this time. But like, eventually I just want to take that person and put my hands on their shoulders and be like, you are being hurt so much more than you're being helped here. Just go. There's a million other jobs that'll work just fine.
I'm gonna close the recording with that.